Welcome to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. Do you wonder how your faith fits together with your profession? Well, join us as we explore how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Well, hello and welcome to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. As always, I am Barry Schwenk, a veterinarian, a pastor, and your host as we explore the intersection of faith and veterinary medicine. It's really hard to believe that we are quickly closing in on our 1-year anniversary with this podcast. Time sure has flown by, and I appreciate there are hundreds and hundreds of you that have subscribed to this podcast and have tuned in regularly on a weekly basis. Subscribed on all these different platforms that we have been utilizing, and I certainly do appreciate your support. As we close in on episode number 52, however, CVM is going to be looking to hear from you. They would like to know how this podcast has impacted you, whether it has blessed you. They'd like to know whether we need to continue this ministry, whether we need to change it, whether there are some things that we can do to better serve you. So you can hopefully find soon and be watching for this, the ever enjoyable Survey Monkey coming in an email account near you. And there will be links on CVM's social media platforms so that you can connect, give us some feedback so we know how to proceed, how to move forward in a way that blesses you and honors God. As I understand it, if that's not incentive enough, I understand that there will be, for those that leave their email address, there will be a drawing for some exclusive Two Roads merchandise that will be drawn live on a podcast in the near future. So be looking for that. I appreciate your support. You know, for many, the questions about the crossroads of faith and veterinary medicine begin during vet school. And today, I have the privilege of being joined by a veterinary student, George DeMers, student at the University of Pennsylvania. And George, welcome to this little podcast. It's great to have you today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
It always surprises me. You know, I was looking forward to chatting with someone about the process of engaging with those questions of faith and veterinary medicine while still in school, but also realizing that you're awful busy. So I appreciate you taking the time. So what year are you in school?
I am a third year currently.
Third year, and that's at University of Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And now, so are you originally from Pennsylvania, or how did you end up there?
You better believe it. I'm from York. If people haven't heard of York, it's one over from Lancaster, and I'm pretty sure you heard of that one. So
of course. So it's kind of a natural transition then for you to head over to UPenn. It puts you kind of close to home, so that's kind of nice.
Yeah, I'm only 2 hours out. I went to Penn State for undergrad, and now I'm over at Penn, so I haven't really ever gone too far. So
my brother did his undergrad or some of his undergrad at Penn State, so that's kind of I was actually during his freshman year, I drove a truck to Happy Valley in order to deliver some of his dorm stuff, and got stuck there in a snowstorm. For the first time ever, I don't remember, I can't remember what year this was. This must have been, oh boy, 95, 96, something like that. And they closed down the toll road. And so I was stuck in a dorm room at Happy Valley, and got to play football in waist-high snow and participated in building giant snow sculptures. And so that's my experience at Penn State.
it's my understanding that blizzard is pretty legendary. I've seen photos actually on Facebook of that. So glad to hear you got to experience that.
Well, I mean, like I'd been around, because I've been around Pennsylvania enough. My dad's from Reading, and so I've been in and out of Pennsylvania most of my life. I don't ever remember the state being just shut down. I thought, and here I was I was in vet school at the time, and so I was supposed to just go drop my brother and all this stuff off, and then I was going to be headed to school, and I was stuck. But it was fun. It was fun. Although I did also realize that there are a lot of people at Penn State that wanted to play football at Penn State but couldn't play football at Penn State, so they play in snow. And there was a lot of bloody noses and all sorts of good stuff.
They really come out of the woodwork in something like that.
They do. Well, so yeah, I appreciate Penn State has a soft spot in my heart. So how are you at UPenn now? How are you getting by? So you said that your third year, so you're going into spring semester of your third year. How have the last 2.5 years been? Were they what you had expected, good, bad, and different?
It's hard to say, it's the vet school experience is usually unprecedented in the life of a student, and it's definitely hard, but also it feels good to, you're doing something you work so hard to get here and you're finally here. So no point in despair, I guess. But there's definitely late nights and stuff like that, but being a veterinarian's hard, vet school's hard, life's hard, I guess.
Well, and you asked for it, right? You were like, you worked really hard to get there, and you're like, oh my.
Right, absolutely. But it's going really well, and I'm about to enter into my clinical year.
Yeah.
I'm focused in dairy medicine, and so I'm really passionate about that. If anyone's listening and you're from Pennsylvania and you're going to be hiring,
there you go,
around 2025, let me know. But anyways,
that's a great. Well, no, you've got to. There's life kind of comes in those different seasons and stages, and you, like you said, you kind of have this singular focus of getting into vet school, and then there's a point in time where you're like, oh boy, as hard as this has been, it's going to end, and there's a new stage that's coming. So it's not a bad one. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about kind of that intersection of school and faith, and how all that works out. Did you how did or did faith play any role in your decision to want to pursue veterinary medicine?
I'm going to say it did not. In fact, I didn't decide I wanted to be a veterinarian until my junior year of undergrad, which is usually really late, because typically the story is, ever since I was 5 years old and my little puppy got sick and I nursed him back to health, I knew I was going to be a veterinarian. And I kind of, to me, that, I don't know, it was something that I've maybe thought about, but it's never like, I'm for sure going to be a vet. That's just what God intends for me, So, but I will say that the vet school experience has enriched my faith life in ways that, in fact, I would consider that the most important aspect of what's occurred to me in the past 3 years. And, when I'm not really a city guy, and, I'm living in Philadelphia now, and it's a lot of change that occurs in a lot of different ways living in a city like that. And I don't know, you're definitely kind of in the desert in a way. But yeah, like ultimately in fact, Penn was the last school that I wanted to go to on my list when I was applying. And for some reason, this is where I ended up going. And I can't imagine how different my life would be otherwise. And it's not because of the vet school,
Right.
So it's from mostly, honestly, and I'm hoping we're going to talk about this, about the Christian Veterinary Fellowship Club at our school and also some of the other communities. But yeah, that's really, and I'm not even just saying that because I'm on the podcast. I genuinely believe, it's impossible to deny that CVF has permanently changed the trajectory of my life. And I've been saying that a lot lately, and I genuinely mean that. So
let's jump right into that. So when you came into vet school, would you have described yourself as a Christian? And then once you got into vet school, and got engaged with CVF, how has that kind of changed, not just the way that you live, but also the way that you perceive yourself as well.
Well, I've always considered myself a Christian. Um, I was raised in a mainstream, um, mainline Protestant tradition, and I had the most amazing experience growing up. I had an amazing church with amazing pastors and amazing um, community members and friends. But I feel like I'm not unique in this, that, you go to college, and for most people, at worst, you go full on apostate and,
Right.
become, agnostic or something. And then at best, it sort of devolves into this spiritualism where you're not actually practicing your faith, but, you still, believe in God, but, you never really pray unless you want something, and
Right.
you never go to church unless you're going home and, you want your parents to be proud of you. Um, so that's kind of what happened to me at Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's weird because, I was still occasionally involved with some Christian groups. Like I was part of a Bible study briefly
Mm-hmm.
and other things, but it was always something that I was kicking the can down the road. It's like, which is so foolish. If you're listening to this, do not do this. But in my mind, I was like, like religion is something I can get serious about later down the road, which is something I think a lot of us can fall into, especially when there's such more seemingly pressing matters like getting into vet school or
Right.
passing these exams. So that's kind of where I was getting to vet school.
Yeah.
Um, and I got to vet school and I'm like, okay, well, the clock's ticking here. I guess maybe I should start taking this more seriously. And I knew about the Christian Veterinary Fellowship Club, CVF, um, but I had nothing to do with it actually. Um, until we got an email saying that they were, looking for new officers.
Mm-hmm.
And I originally wasn't going to do it. But Katie Brooks, if you're listening, she made me do it. And God bless her,
Mm-hmm.
um, because that was sort of the beginning of everything.
Mm-hmm. So you had this, I mean, and this is not, your story is not one that is uncommon. Um, you know, we all kind of think that there are these more pressing things, and it can kind of sneak up on you. There are lots of folks that I've kind of talked with that there's always something more pressing, and the next thing you know, it's the thing that's pressing is retirement, and the thing that's pressing, and
Yes.
so the sooner that you recognize um, just how important this aspect of your life is, um, it really does, change the trajectory of your life, as you said. So let's talk about that CVF then. So you get this email. They're looking for new officers. You decide to you hadn't been connected. You kind of wander into this. What was that initial contact with CVF like, and then how has it grown?
Well, it started out as an email and I filled out a Google form. I don't even know what I said. There were some essays on there, short answer things. And I'd be curious actually to go and look back at what I said. But yeah, anyways, I'm like, okay, I'm the president now for some reason.
That's right.
Um, and,
Congratulations, sir.
I've never even read the Bible, and my primary role is going to be leading a Bible study.
Right.
And, and that's the thing, like if there's two things that happened, the first is that I actually started reading the Word of God. And I think people have this idea in their heads of who Jesus is like.
Yeah.
And but until you go and read the Gospels, like beginning to end, I feel like you realize like, wow, and it can look a lot differently for different people. But for me, I was like, wow, this Jesus is a lot different than I had initially thought.
Yeah.
He says things that's, I don't want to use the word scare because,
Hmm.
but it definitely makes you sit up straight,
Yep. Yep.
you know? So that was the first thing. And then the second thing was, here I am as the president of the Christian club. I'm a pretty well-known student. People know that about me now. am I going to continue to scandalize the faith by getting drunk at every courtyard happy hour on Fridays with the rest of the school? Am I going to, you know, how's this going to look with my relationship with my now fiance? All these things. And so it added some accountability too,
Mm.
which up until that point I could just sort of hide out. Um, and so those were the two things. Um,
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I like to use the analogy sometimes of when I became a dad. Like up until that point, they handed me my daughter for the first time. I wasn't any different before and after that moment. But I suddenly had this label on me, and everybody kind of saw me differently. And I had to decide, am I going to grow in that role, or am I going to abuse the role? Like, am I gonna continue to walk in all the things that I didn't know and, and be called a dad, or am I going to actually grow and be live up to the title that I had? And it kind of sounds like, well, I guess I could go back to the same thing with um, chemistry. It's kind of the same way. I found myself in chemistry, and I found that people were asking me questions, and um, the more they asked, the more that I realized I needed to have better answers. So I needed to start studying a little bit harder. It's the same kind of thing. And so did that really change kind of your mindset about did it change kind of how you saw yourself, or was it more about the way that you thought that other people were perceiving you and then trying to live up to their expectation?
I think the gut reaction is what I think is the how people are perceiving you, which is certainly a lesser good. If
Mm,
you're acting just because you're worried about how other people are going to perceive you, I don't think you can fully embrace virtue that way.
mm,
But that's where it starts, and that's fine. But eventually it became sort of like what you're saying, where it's like there are now other stakeholders
mm.
that what I say and do matters.
Yeah.
And it's not just me anymore, you
Mm,
know? And we all have relationships like that. So it wasn't just because of me being in this role as president, um, but yeah, so
mm.
I think that's what
Yeah.
it was.
Well, so now maybe explain a little bit, because there might be some folks that are listening, and we have folks that some that are not yet vet students, some that are vet students, some that are way beyond being vet students. So explain then what the CVF group. For those that don't know, CVF stands for Christian Veterinary Fellowship. Um, Describe what that group is and the kinds of things that that group does, and kind of your role within that as the president.
Yeah, so I think it looks different for every school, so I can only really speak to what we do, but definitely it's mostly focused on fellowship and um, our Bible study and also other acts of service. Um, for us, we have a weekly Bible study, and the officers are usually in charge of. We rotate through and lead. We normally go a chapter at a time of whatever. So while we were here, we read Genesis 37 to 50, which is the Joseph story, which a Lutheran minister friend of mine recommended that as like the start. And I thought that's such an interesting thing because I feel like Bible studies don't often delve into I mean, they maybe start at like the very beginning of Genesis if they're going to read anything
Right.
in the Old Testament at all, but they rarely go to the Old Testament. So I encourage any Bible studies out there to don't be afraid to go into what consists of the majority of the Bible. you
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
um, so that's the main thing we do. We also, like I said, fellowship. We have, get-togethers. We've had Christmas parties. We've had like praise and worship nights. Sit around a campfire, singing along to a guy playing the guitar. And we also do little things for the school. So like during finals, we'll bake cookies for everyone, and we'll put Bible verses in them to motivate people. That sort of thing. So it's really nothing magnificent. It's just sort of a little body of believers um, just sort of there for each other. That's really all there is to it, at least at our school. Um,
I wouldn't discount that. I wouldn't or I wouldn't discount that word magnificent, because it really is, the body of Christ just learning to live. And sometimes we get sidetracked because, again, when you were talking about earlier about, having time to think about religion later, sometimes we think about, our faith walk as being this monumental thing that has to be done. And yet the reality of our Christian walk is a culmination of all the little things, and the little intentions that we do every single day, the way that we think, the way that we interact with people. And it's those small drops that really turn into the waterfall that make change. So yeah, don't discount that, because there are lots of folks that will be impacted by cookies during finals, and that's to God's glory. So what have you found? What have you found in your group that has been, the biggest blessing, and then also the thing that's been the biggest challenge for your group?
hmm.
Maybe I should break that apart, because those were two really big questions. It's all at once.
Okay, well, I'll start with the biggest blessing.
Yeah.
The biggest blessing is just knowing you're not alone.
Mm,
And this is going to tie into the biggest challenge.
mm,
And I think anyone who's even some of the regional reps that have worked in the Northeast,
mm,
it's definitely different from working in other places. And people are just generally less receptive to faith in general. And I think there's a lot of factors there that we don't need to dig into right now. But suffice to say that um, you know, the Christians, we're definitely not in you know, um, the limelight. We're kind of
right.
tucked away, and that's where it can really thrive. I mean, even back to the early church, like
Mhm.
this is where we come from, and so it's such a blessing to have this little oasis of people who, and we don't agree on everything, of course, but at the end of the day, like we uh, call Jesus Christ Lord and Savior and Son of God, um, and so just that's the biggest blessing. The biggest challenge is just facing the opposition. I mean, we get angry emails when we do something wrong, like I don't know, mention Christ as Lord in an email or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of opposition, and I don't think we get a whole lot of support from the university, but also um, we don't need them.
Right.
So
Well, I mean, if only Jesus had said something about the world hating us because of him. If only he had told us, right? Is that the well, and just to maybe encourage you a little bit too. I'm kind of on the West Coast, and working with student groups in this part of the world, is very similar to the Pacific, to the Northeast, and you find kind of say I remember there was a student group that I worked with once that, had been, I think they had threatened, I think the university, somebody had gone to the university threatening to revoke their charter, because they were doing a fundraiser at a Chick-fil-A, um, restaurant. And so, like, there's that level of persecution. And to be honest, within the world, we're going to face it. I mean, if you're following Christ, you're going to face it. And the luxury sometimes of thinking that we can be in a place where you have this majority, um, of believers, even there's a different level of persecution. But I appreciate, kind of taking that stand and finding that place. So now through CVF, my guess is you've kind of gotten connected to CVM and with the region reps. How has CVM, supported you as a leader or your group? How do folks that volunteer through CVM, how do they help connect and support students like you?
I think they just, especially the regional representatives, Dr. Song, thank you. I just you don't realize like how many resources are really out there that
Mm-hmm.
are here for us, and they definitely make those, they make you aware of those. Also, it's great to have access to the larger opportunities like real life, real impact that's, put together by those things. And so I think just, and, obviously like the monetary support and stuff, with like helping getting food. Thank you, Nutramax, all those things. They're just the little things, I mean, we're here, working and you guys are here supporting that. And yeah.
Yeah, and it's good to hear, and I think back as for myself as a vet student, um, at that time there weren't regional representatives, there wasn't real life, real impact. What all that kind of came out of were veterinary professionals who were intentional about praying and mentoring and reaching out to vet students. And for me, my life was really impacted and encouraged and challenged and changed by men and women who were within the profession that were also followers of Christ that saw engaging and that role with students as being an active ministry. And we, as CVM, we focus on the M for missions, and forget that there's an entire generation of upcoming veterinarians that need that kind of support. They need that kind of prayer. They need, as they are getting ready to go into clinicals, that's a whole new thing. You need prayer. As you're looking for a job after May 2025 in the dairy industry, George DeMers, remember that name. You need prayer and you need support and you need people that run clinics in ethical ways that show good support and wellness for their incoming veterinarians. Speaking at real life, real impact, sharing life stories, all of those things are crucially important. So what's exciting you about this upcoming year of clinicals, and what does that look like for your role within CVF and that transition?
Yeah. So, I'm actually pretty nervous, making this change just because, I'm very much one for my routine
Hmm.
and that plays into my faith life significantly. So, and I know things are about to change.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because of the nature of things, us officers of 30 years have handed those on to new officers, and we're going to, make guest appearances now and then when we can. But we're kind of, I joked, David Buckwalter, who's the current president now, I was like, here's my, sacramental handshake, like with the, to pass on this authority. Not that there's any real authority, but
Uh,
uh, but but um, but yeah, and I just want to go back real quick to what you were
yeah.
saying about um, people don't realize how critical formation is during this time of your life. We're 22, 24, 25. Physiologically, we know our brains are fully developed now. Okay. So we're more than ever able to, rationally and willfully interact with the truths being proposed by the gospel, and so this moment in time, these little things, like I said, it like permanently changed the trajectory of my life. It's not always just, the missions like going and those are so critical, but it's not, we're forming people who are going to go out and be disciples for the rest of their lives. And you and me and many others who are listening, I'm sure, had that conversion while they were in vet school,
Yeah.
and so because this is a critical time in your life, even if you're not in vet school, and you're this age, this is when ultimately when you sit down and think, how do I want to live the rest of my life? And a lot of people, address that question sooner or later. I mean, I've met middle schoolers that have more wisdom than some 30-year-olds, so but for a lot of people and for myself, I found that, it was just the perfect time. Um, and so if people are looking to help in those sorts of things, like even just speaking of real life, real impact, or those sorts of things, just reaching out to your school's club, saying, I'd love to just hang out and we can just, engage in fellowship together and strengthen each other. That's so important. So,
Well, George, I really appreciate you taking the time to share some of that, and I think that in your story and in kind of the openness of what you shared, I think that for many, it's good to realize that the trajectory of your life can be changed at any moment, and let's get intentional about it sooner as opposed to later, because that impact could be substantial. And I appreciate you kind of giving us some insight into what's happening on our university campuses, the role that believers are playing in the lives of one another as students, as veterinarians, and ultimately, hopefully for everyone who's listening at home, in your car, while you're out jogging, wherever you happen to be, hopefully as you've been listening to George share about the trajectory in his life, hopefully you too are learning how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Thank you for listening to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. If you are blessed by this content, like and subscribe so that you are alerted when new content is released. If you would like more information about CVM, or if you have questions, comments, or topical suggestions, you can find us online at www.cvm.org. Or you can contact us by emailing podcast@cvm.org. God has a plan for the nations, and that plan includes you. We pray that CVM has encouraged you to live out your calling with confidence and competence. So, until next time, may the voice of the shepherd ring loud and clear as you follow him in faith to the intersection of two roads crossing.